Hi, I'm Gabriel Deverens from the Walkable Ottawa podcast. We are a homegrown initiative focused on transitioning Ottawa's neighborhoods into more walkable communities. We interview key stakeholders, industry leaders, and community members to see how we can build a better Ottawa of tomorrow. On today's episode, we have Sheila Perry, who is a past president of the Federation of Citizens Associations of Ottawa. They're an umbrella group that represents all community associations in the region. We chat about their role in trying to transition our neighborhoods to be more walkable communities. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Sheila, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Good.
Given all the circumstances,
Yeah.
we're doing pretty well, I'd say.
I think we're doing pretty well too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good to be here. Thanks.
Good. So let's kind of get the conversation started. What is the FCA? What do you guys do? What's your roles or your responsibilities of the organization?
Well, thanks for the question. The FCA is a very interesting organization. If you think of it in very short umbrella terms, it's an umbrella organization for community associations across the city.
Okay.
And our mantra is really neighborhoods matter. So when you look at that and the composition right across the city, as growth happens, but also historically, you've got organizations that have been around for many, many years.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting. They're changing times, but the bottom line for us is really trying to engage, support, and really keep a focus on how neighborhoods can be improved.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, our big committees, as you can imagine, and that's part of our big conversation, is the planning side. So we have a planning committee that's very active. We have a transportation committee. We have environmental issues. We have governance issues. And within all those committees, there's a broad membership, obviously, right across the city. So we're well over 50 organizations coming together. Special interest organizations have also joined in. So Green Space Alliance is part of us now, Healthy Transportation Coalition, cafes, which is the community associations for environmental sustainability.
Okay.
So groups such as those, have embraced our work, and it's a collective opportunity to get together, to share issues. We meet monthly. And we've actually been doing that successfully during COVID.
That's
so
awesome.
It's quite interesting. Our most recent meetings included Chief Peter Slowly and Dr. Vera Etches.
Oh, cool.
And,
awesome.
It's wonderful for them as well to have that outreach. We're not having to drive everywhere. But it's a very different kind of feel for a meeting because it's not a person-to-person easily done as we would when we would normally have a general meeting.
That's right.
And just so you know, we have been in the habit, too, of having our meetings in various locations. So a general meeting could be out in Orleans in 1 month. Our last one that we actually had before COVID, we were at Carlingwood. Or Carlington. We've spent time at Glebe Community Center. We've had them in Overbrook. We've had them in Canada, Manotick. So the idea is to go to those places. And then aside from that, we have monthly board meetings and, of course, then the committee meetings on top of that. So we're an active organization.
So I guess from both ends of the city, so from kind of Orleans all the way to Canada, Stittsville to Barrhaven, Riverside South, and everything, all the neighborhoods within the Greenbelt.
That's correct.
So you guys, there's obviously community associations for all of those individual kind of communities. And I guess you guys represent the collective of all of these associations. And help kind of gather the positions of the sentiment of all those individual communities and all their individual factors to kind of chat with whatever current issues. And I guess one of the current issues that we have now is we are going through a very interesting exercise in terms of the new official plan. Right. So the City of Ottawa has been, we're expecting their draft of the new official plan to come out in the next month or so. And I understand it's something that you guys at the SCA have been working or following and being involved and collaborating with closely.
It's extremely important. It is
Mm-hmm.
going to set the stage for many, many years to come. So being
So how many
involved,
years would that document be in effect for?
well, the
Or how long of a
review,
horizon are we looking at?
yeah, well, the review by provincial standards has to be done every 5 years.
Okay.
However, this horizon is looking beyond 2036 and well into 2040s.
Mm,
And you can imagine the kind of planning and trying to be visionary around that
yeah,
with a monstrous geographic area.
I know. Because I understand you worked on the last version of the official plan when it was last done. So you have the experience of having worked on the previous version, which was, I guess, soon after the City of Ottawa amalgamated. And now fast track a few years later, here we are in 2020 and trying to go through that same visionary exercise as before.
Well, it's quite a bit different this time,
Okay.
happily, I must say. And that's part of why it's so important to have that good rapport with city staff.
Mm,
The players have changed tremendously
mm-hmm.
in all areas. So when I was involved back in 2013, that's 7 years
Oh
ago,
my
it's hard
gosh.
to imagine the changes, but we had a different leadership that was at the city level. We
Mm-hmm.
had different leadership at the GOBA level. So, it's meeting these people on their turf. And that was very much something that I was very interested in. So, just to give you an example, we were very much, I felt, on the fringe of the OP involvement or official plan involvement in
And
2013.
when you say on the fringe, you mean like a,
Well, how do you engage people
right.
is the big thing.
Yeah.
Is engagement really having good dialogue, just like we're having right now,
Mm-hmm.
FaceTime, talking out some of the issues, setting about those goals. So I'll just give you an example. The city had various meetings held at various centers, and I believe there were 5 or so. But anyway, we were trying to find out where they were, when, and of course we would promote this for the various community
Mm-hmm.
associations. But the dialogue was simply with the maps up for everybody to look at. And we really did not get to some of the heart of the issues. So one of the big things was that looking at the transportation link to the airport. And when had to book our own rooms adjacent to the city to be able to get the dialogue.
Mm,
So, it was awkward and
yeah.
it was uphill sledding, I'll call it, all the way to try to make sure that happened. The big difference this time, and I have to say it's leadership 101. It's Steve
Yeah.
Willis and his leadership and his team. So we've got Don Hernwire and you've got Alain Meglowitz, who are helping lead a lot of this,
Mm-hmm.
and the Engage Ottawa kind of momentum. And you're seeing that on the website, and happily that's there because given COVID, people are trying to find ways to still be involved. So this time round, you're seeing, a very strong framework of
Mm,
5 big moves,
yeah.
being the platform, and staff put that forward. City Council embraced it. Now we're moving forward with trying to get the growth management plan details and what that will entail.
Mm-hmm.
And we should be hearing about that later in November.
So what were the 5 big moves from the city? What was their kind of direction in terms of um, what they're working on right now?
Yeah, so very interesting. Resilience jumps right off the
Mm-hmm.
plot. It really grabs my attention right away. That's one of them. Economy is another.
Mm-hmm.
Mobility is another. So when you start to look at that and design, which is good because you start to look at that in neighborhoods and
Yeah.
how does that affect. So when you look at, for example, the mobility side of things, what does that entail? Well, we've got LRT very much as a huge, huge project. Some of the building around that and the intensification, how's that going to work out and how that's going to play? And if
Mm-hmm.
mobility is tops on this. Does that include walking areas? Does that include cycling areas? Other means of getting around than just the car? So that's an example. Economy strikes me as an absolutely critical piece right now. My worry personally is seeing the plazas that we've got, which is very much, I would say, probably in transition. They're being challenged pending how frequently people go back and forth. If you look at how people are ordering things online, that's huge, that
Yeah.
industry. Look at Shopify and what they've decided. They're working out of home. And that's happening in many, many, many communities. I know in Overbrook, we're seeing that, work out of home, do Zoom, do your meetings, etc. So the economy, how do we deal with that? And CBC had a very interesting discussion on this yesterday, looking at some of the small businesses, that we don't lose them,
Yeah.
because that brings the neighborhood focus.
Absolutely.
And the other piece that I would say that it has really struck a welcome chord, certainly with me, but with, I think, many, is the discussion around that 15-minute neighborhood. And that gets into, what is it we want in these neighborhoods? What do we really want to preserve? Because you don't want to throw everything out for intensification's sake. And, studies in health, et cetera, we have to be so mindful of that.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I find there's as I've been more involved in involved with Walkable Ottawa, and reading up on the issues and looking at it from a different perspective, from just a simple urban planning perspective, from a zoning perspective, from the real estate market, and some of the supply issues that we're seeing on the resale market now, either for rent, for buy, and the big jump in prices, but also just anecdotally spending time with people and seeing kind of what their experience has been like as they're spending more times in their neighborhood, right? So now you talk to people, they're starting to notice things a little bit more. Are there sidewalks? What am I close to? Instead of going for coffee breaks with somebody in the office, you're going to going for a walk with your neighbor or something like that. And it's such a very, I find it so important, because that concept of 15-minute neighborhoods, which means that, residents are within, 80% of their, weekly things that they would need, grocery stores, pharmacy, that kind of stuff, within a 15-minute walk. So, which equates to 750 or meters or a kilometer, depending which way you're looking at it. And, if you kind of pick random spots across the city, you notice that not many neighborhoods are actually walkable, and the neighborhoods that are walkable now, the Glebe and Westboro and Hintonburg, well, they're quite expensive to live there, so it's, how do we introduce that kind of lifestyle that to other communities across the city? And there's certain just kind of looking at the way the city's built, you have the core neighborhoods that were, built, let's say, before the Second World War. And then you have the big wave of construction after the Second World War. And how do we kind of integrate those neighborhoods to be more walkable?
Yeah. That's really important. And, I think we're seeing that more now. Look at your own situation. How many people are walking? Far, far, far more than they ever did.
Yeah.
And how many have dogs, for example, and
That's
the pet industry, etc. But, all of that aside, it's quality of life for people. And if you're looking at more of that coming out of the home level, or in a neighborhood,
or the community level,
and the community feel, and how do you embrace that? So no quick answers on it, but the one thing that strikes me in terms of like this 15-minute neighborhood idea is, it's almost a little bit like doing your inventory of a checklist. Do you have the grocery store? Do you have the amenities? Do you have the things that people really, really need? And then can they get to them? Now, car's always going to be around in my view, but, it's just the reality of you're going to be, in many cases, having to cart things, big items, etc. But when you're starting to look at how, what have you got around? Have you got the grocery store? Have you got the hardware stores,
Yeah,
the handy items? And that makes it really attractive.
absolutely.
So
And I
if you
think
look at the Glebe, for example, and I
mhm,
use that as an example, it's lovely, lovely main street there. It's been established many, many, many years. That street character is very important
mm,
to retain and not abuse it.
yeah,
And you've got businesses along there, but then on the periphery, this lovely group of neighborhood avenues, walkable, beautiful trees,
hmm,
and it's got that history. If you go to one of the suburb areas, that's a tricky piece
hmm,
because many of those people are having to completely rely on a vehicle.
that's right.
So the planning to help that, and that's why I mentioned, the five big moves, the economic side of that, hopefully the city planners and all of us will be on side for really saying, here's what we really need in this neighborhood. Here's what's missing. And
So
how do we get there?
how do we find out as a leader of a prominent community association? How do you make sure that your voice gets heard and that you're part of that conversation and that you feel, that the input that you're gathering, the sentiment from the community associations that you represent, gets translated into policy?
Well, that's a tough one.
The
That's the million dollar,
million dollar
multi-million dollar
question.
question. But
That's it.
all kidding aside, we're all volunteers. And
Yeah.
I'm not sure I mentioned that at the outset. But what's really important, there's a passion that goes with that. A lot of times people will say, oh, it's NIMBYism. Well, no, it's really what works. And that's a very fine line in all of
Mm-hmm.
this. People who've made that investment in their neighborhoods, they have that passion. Um, if they don't have that ownership, it's a tricky business to try to get that buy-in. But community associations, and I'm just thinking ahead here, with the transect discussion that's going to be coming up. We know
Mm-hmm.
there will be transects or area regions, if you will, of Ottawa.
Yeah.
Within that, there are those neighborhoods and those community
Yeah.
associations. So activating them through a planning, a coordinated process, and I see that that could be managed quite effectively
Mm-hmm.
to basically, you're doing an inventory
Yeah.
of some of the things and go to the folks. So right now, I'll give you two examples of things. I'm involved right now with a CARP study,
Okay.
and we're working with the Councillor Eli Shintiri and the BIA. And this has come out of the School of Telfer Management at University of Ottawa as volunteers, and it's part of a practicum where we're reaching out to the citizens through the community association and so on to find out what it is. How is life in
Mm.
CARP? And we're going to have the results of that coming out fairly shortly.
Yeah.
And hopefully that kind of initiative will be listened to by the city planners and help with a go forward kind of plan.
Mm-hmm.
So it's everything from, in a village it's very different and we must not exploit it.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I can tell you right now, grocery store, there isn't one there.
Mm.
So that's an example that has come forward. Roads, there's some big truck movement along some of those roads.
Yeah.
Residents are saying, please protect us.
Yeah.
So, it's that fine line. So then inner city, and if you look at areas that are just exploding in development,
Mm-hmm.
Westboro, Hintonburg, these areas, the caution there is to not overdevelop.
Mm.
And the pressure on the infrastructure is enormous. That's another thing that is part of all of this that
Mm-hmm.
has to be very, very much respected.
Yeah.
And that takes engineers and good planning.
Yeah.
So back to how do you engage? Well, the transects are really going to be, I see that as a city way forward. Within the engagement of those various areas, those players are going to have to come together. And I think within each community association, the ones that are very high active, etc., are really going to have to grapple with what is it that we want, what do we want to retain, and
Hmm.
what do we really want to park or put a caution
That's
on.
right. Yeah, and I think you really need all factors to be working in order for it to work. And I think in order to kind of transition, especially urban, already established neighborhoods to be more walkable, you need all factors to be playing to be working all in cohesion, and we need to set the bar actually quite high, or else we're not going to steer away our developments in our city from being car centric to being completely, you might just need a car on the odd weekend or once or twice a month kind of thing.
Yep.
So
I think that's actually quite a reality.
hmm
I can tell you a number of things I get through the email. It's very clear a number of people are saying, we don't need that second car.
that's right. And it's like that lifestyle where people are, biking to the grocery store, going through the park,
Yeah.
or biking maybe to work or something like that. It's such a healthier lifestyle. And now, we're at this kind of juncture where life is hard, you know, and it's taken a toll on people in terms of their physical wellness and also their mental health wellness. But when people live in a very active community that has maybe a greater density than what they might be accustomed to in other parts of the neighborhood, that lifestyle choice, I think, holistically is healthier because there's more people, there's more connections, there's more people when you're walking down the sidewalks. And the big part about walkable communities that from my research is it's the people that make it interesting. Communities that have a front porch, people are more likely to engage with their neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously sidewalks help with that.
Well,
But
it's very
obviously,
interesting because
yeah,
it's true. You think about it, how many people do you chat with when you're out walking?
exactly.
And that's very much
Yeah,
what has been happening.
yeah.
Neighbors
So,
that we've never seen
yeah.
because it's out, they go in the car first thing in the morning or off they go to work. Well,
Mm-hmm.
now when they're at home, it's changed that
Mm-hmm.
kind of environment.
Yeah.
So,
And
I think we're social creatures.
100%. Yeah,
People are,
that's one thing we've learned this year. We're
yeah,
social creatures.
people
That's it.
want to meet.
Yeah.
They want to chat,
Yeah.
and that's a very important component. So neighborhoods matter for sure in all
Mm-hmm.
of this.
Yeah.
You mentioned one of the words cohesion. And I really like that because I think that cohesiveness is going to be really needed going forward. And that's at all levels. This
Mm-hmm.
isn't just development industry going off. This is going to include all levels of government for sure, talking. The balance, how do you get that in your
Yeah.
various neighborhoods and you don't overload any one area?
Yeah.
And then we're talking about the people who actually live there along with the industry.
Mm-hmm.
And so, city, industry, and people.
Yeah.
And if we
Exactly.
keep that in mind, that cohesion, and keep that discussion going, and that has to happen in all areas.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing here is this isn't going to be an instant overnight
No,
at all.
no, it's going to be a slow process.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit hard to kind of envision, okay, so we're proposing these changes to the zoning bylaw, for example, which dictates, height, mass, the scope of any building on any one given property. What does that look like? Well, I think from the work that we've done in terms of the 3D modeling through Walkable Ottawa, we've actually picked Overbrook, which is a community that both of you and I live in, and we did a 3D representation of what a street could look like,
Mm-hmm.
what it looks like now, what it looks like in 10 years, and what it looks like in 25 years. And depending on what intensification measures that we put in, how that might impact the number of people that live there, because it is a chicken before the egg. For those communities to transition towards being for in Overbrook, we're like 2 or 3 kilometers from Parliament Hill, right? But it's not a walkable community really. So how do we transition now? Well, we need enough. One, we need those veins where there can be a bit more commercial businesses. So we need that commercial zoning to go through. And then how do you transition that from today until 10 years and 25 years? So people can have those destinations to walk to, and business can start establishing themselves there within the local fabric of their community, but that once they do, they'll actually be able to survive and thrive because there's enough people to withstand a coffee shop or to withstand a lawyer's office or to withstand a physiotherapy clinic or something like that.
Oh, that
So,
is so key. And
hmm
that comes back to our economy. You know, it's high risk for an entrepreneur to open up something
yeah,
if it's in a food desert or, you know, a place that it just isn't attractive.
hmm
So, you know, that's part of the transition. And the economy and all around that is a tricky piece.
yeah,
So in Overbrook, you know, I'll use the example you talked a bit about it, is the coffee shop. Wouldn't it be nice if we go all the way over to Starbucks over at Coventry Road, but that's a busy thoroughfare.
for
Is
sure.
there a nice spot in between that?
Yeah,
And you can think of places that
yeah,
could be there.
yeah.
Um,
But it's that exact kind of sentiment. Wouldn't it be nice, going through that exercise where residents are, because residents knows the issues in their neighborhoods, and wouldn't it be nice, and ask those residents to finish that conversation,
yeah.
so we can kind of figure out the sentiment. And I know the first neighborhood study that we did through Walkable Ottawa through Rosalind's work, one of the founding members, was in Overbrook, and she was a bit surprised at the responsiveness of the neighborhood changing and people being very excited. And I think in the absence of having a vision proposed to them, people will kind of come up with their own conclusions. But if they feel that that's the direction that we're going, that's where we will transition in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years.
Mhm.
Um,
So you mentioned about the 3D, for
yeah,
example. Visuals work. My education background is in it's education. And, you know, put a picture in front of people, imagine what could be done.
yeah,
And actually, that exercise was done in the Glebe as well, I know, with Carolyn McKenzie and group. But that has to happen in various areas.
for
So
sure.
back to the word
And we should. Residents
intensification.
should be told. They should be shown exactly, because it is a big ask. These people are heavily invested in their communities,
Hmm.
and it's a big ask.
Hmm.
The city's changing. There's 400,000 people coming in the next 20 years. There's a lot of different dynamics at play. We're growing in a lot of different directions.
Hmm.
And if we're going to say, hey, your neighborhood, can tolerate, 10, 20, 30% more density, or maybe more, maybe less, depending on how old the neighborhood is and how well established it is, well, show me, and I think if you show them a logical kind of picture or framework, then you will get buy-in and you will get engagement through that
So you
process.
mentioned zoning,
Hmm.
and I think the other is the intensification.
Yeah,
Those two are key.
they're very, yeah.
So we know the province has given us the direction of moving on the intensification, but to define that in various areas, not
Hmm.
exploit it,
Yeah,
is a critical piece. And
that's
that's
right.
where people's backs get up, I think.
100%. And there's eyesore developments, unfortunately, in
Yeah.
probably each community that you residents can point to,
Yeah.
you
But the
know?
city staff can help us with that. And I think that's where, you know, the next exercise in the official plan will be going through some of that zoning
Hmm.
within those transects.
Hmm.
It's a huge role. What is permitted along a main corridor? Well, if it's a corridor and a route that will allow the height, and I use the example of the Glebe, you know, if you've got a main street area, certain height, not to skyscraper the area, but to have something that could be amenable. And what's wrong with going up to 2, maybe 3 stories
Hmm.
um, in the infill areas or with the adjacent areas? So the nodes and corridors, once that's defined of those
Yeah.
areas, I honestly believe that that will help very much in
Yeah.
various communities. And already lots of people are aware of that through transportation issues. But Lincoln Fields, for example, take a look. LRT.
Hmm.
Look at the change potential in that particular area. And it's attractive in that area,
Hmm.
not far from the Ottawa River.
Yeah.
You can see the interest that could happen.
Hmm.
Older neighborhoods such as ours, which is Overbrook, you know, aging buildings. We're seeing a lot of those come down on a lot. Up goes maybe 2 or 3 semis.
Hmm.
And that's the wish of many people to see that happen.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've noticed is that in 1950, there used to be 7.9 residents per household, and now we're at 2.4. So that's a really drastic change. So if you take, let's say, your average community where there's a 50 by 100-foot lot. Well, before there was 8 people there, now there's 2.4, So and there's way more people than there was at that point in time living there. So just the way we live, the households have become smaller, and now therefore, the needs for those properties, and especially the ones that are being rebuilt, have changed.
But
So
there's some monster homes out there too,
well,
aren't
that's
there?
the thing. And I think the way that the zoning is written now, sometimes there's other uses that are allowed within that specific parcel, mostly in kind of R3 or R4 neighborhoods. So just for, I guess, a little bit of context, every property in Ottawa has a zoning code, and R being the first letter, so for residential, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 will dictate the amount of density that's there. So R1, one house, one lot. And that's been a big topic of conversation with the folks at Ecology Ottawa, because, they're actually looking for a bit more density, so we can kind of wash away from our car-centric culture. But so R1, one house, one lot. R2, we're allowed to build semis. And then when you fall into R3 zone, then you can have a triplex, so 3 horizontal properties. And then R4, which has been a specific subset of the zoning in Ottawa that's been quite controversial for many years, allows for low-rise apartments. So you're allowed 3.5 stories. So just to kind of circle back, a lot of the zone, like, I think it's perfect example. If you take at most neighborhoods that have seen a lot of intensification, so Vanier, Overbrook, Carlington, around the Lincoln Fields areas, semis are being built. And why? There's a lot of different housing types that exist out there, but it only seems that semis are being built. And these are actually oversized semis, in the sense that there's, they sell for, depending on the neighborhood and how desirable it is, anywhere from 800,000 and 900,000 to 1.1, 1.2. Right? So if that's a new type of housing that is mostly being built in the urban neighborhoods, well, it's not sustainable, because the average family can't afford a house of that price. So what do you do?
So the
Right?
key word is affordability. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm not an expert in the building industry, but the materials, from what I am understanding in the most recent time, is
Yeah,
that they're escalating the prices.
correct.
And to build a semi, or is that affordable? So the small house, you're hearing stories now of the tiny house movement. You're
Mm-hmm.
hearing even the coach house,
Yeah.
models. And some of that's happening quite successfully out in the West.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and if you look at various cities and how they're accommodating, I think we can take some of those examples. But I am very concerned about the affordability. And I know that GOBA, and talking with Jason and various people at the city, we're in a very big crisis, I would say, at this time. And
Mm-hmm.
it's just not us here in Ottawa,
No,
it's nationally.
it's nationally, of course. Housing's
And
expensive in
we're
Canada.
seeing the government react with some funds coming through. Canada Mortgage and Housing is one
Mm-hmm.
way, but those things don't get built overnight. So one of the things, and this is again thinking out of the box, we're going to have vacant buildings.
A few.
And
Yeah.
these are office buildings. We're a federal jurisdiction
Mm-hmm.
area. There's opportunities galore, in my
Mm.
view, to see some retrofits being looked at
Mm-hmm.
and examine. And again, strategically looking at where those might be.
Yeah.
Um, and the small family. I mean, if you're looking at the small family, do they really need that oversized place?
I don't
Are
think
they going to
so.
be able to afford it?
It's
And
funny. I think it's kind of gone in waves where people's requirements for space kind of went up. If you kind of look over through time, the last 30, 40 years, people's requirements for space kind of went up, because mainly they could afford it and it was accessible. And then, for friends in my generation, we don't have these lavish, 2,500 square feet is way too big.
Yeah.
You know, people are very comfortable raising a family in 1,400 square feet and living, if they're a couple and they're a single person, in 500, 600, 700 square feet. So how do we create that more of that type of housing? And for me as a real estate agent for the last 7 years, this year specifically, I've never seen so many people look to buy in outlying communities just outside of Ottawa. You know, so Almont and Smith Falls and Arnprior and Limoges and Osgood, and you know, and it's obviously a nature byproduct of what people can afford, but at the same time, some of those communities are actually more walkable than and tight knit and have a strong sense of identity than other urban neighborhoods, which are supposed to be close to all of the, you know, amenities nearby, you know, which is the reason why they're living in a major metropolitan area. So that transition is changing, and I think it's a very exciting time, you know?
Well, in real
So,
estate, you're seeing the momentum of these things happening, and those are all very interesting trends. And of course, the prices are escalating as well in the
yeah,
housing.
yeah.
But people will move with their feet, as they say. I think the choice will become the big thing for people, reevaluating where can they, first of all, live, work, and play
Mm-hmm.
with the best enjoyment. You know, and it's a little bit like you walk with your feet. You know, you're going to walk to, if you can, and if it's doable, to consider that. Many people are, I think, in this time of real challenge and COVID, re-examining a lot of that,
A
as
lot
you
of it.
say.
Yeah.
And there's nothing like that lovely village feel. And I know that from the feel of just chatting with people. Richmond,
Mm-hmm.
it's delightful.
Yeah.
Same with Carp.
Yeah.
So can we create that village appeal within our neighborhoods?
I think so. I think every neighborhood in now has their own little personality, if you want. You know, the
Mhm.
Glebe's a little different than Westboro, and Hintonburg's a little different than Old Ottawa South, and Vanya's a little different than Overbrook, and you know, so there's already that kind of feel and personality to it. But I think it's there needs to be more engagement of people, and I think how we organize space fundamentally. You know, we can look at zoning in terms of what people are allowed to build from, you know, when they own the land themselves, but you know, in terms of city amenities, you know, sidewalks and
It's critical.
parks and community centers and schools um and certain things are kind of lacking, but it's
Well, you've raised and I'd like to jump in on that because that those spaces, community spaces,
mhm,
the parks, and I know Ecology Ottawa and trees and so
yeah,
on, make that enjoyable, healthy type of environment. It comes at a big cost to build a community center.
mhm,
Um, and that has to be something completely on in the planning stage on this. It's not just, you know, your shopping side of the world. It's what you have for spaces for gathering, sports, activities, etc. So where are we going to derive the funds for that kind of thing? Development charges, you know, and that's a big discussion we're having right now with the city. Are we in a position, and are the builders in the position with looking at a bit of a restructure in that?
mhm.
And that makes better sense. And how are we doing next to other cities? You know, are we below, on par, or way above? Well,
In
when it
terms of being a
in
place
terms of
for
the
a builder to kind of build, right? Because
you
there's
know, and the
obviously
development
tax.
charges that go with that.
That's right.
And do you want it, you don't want to make it prohibitive because your goal is, I think we're saying that intensification, that's been part of it. Definitely. Looking at the various neighborhoods and what can be done, but how do you achieve that to make it attractive enough to get the right kind of build?
Mhm.
Which comes back to, do we want the monastery homes? There'll probably be few out there that'll always want to have that.
Yeah.
But for the person who just wants something totally functional, and there are a lot of people out there who are single, who smaller family, completely, the kids have gone, maybe they want to downsize. And you're seeing that happening. I've never seen so many people online with trying to get rid of things or sell them on, But I think that's part of the culture of transition that we're actually going to be seeing more of.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's a very interesting thing. The feel, what I like about the Walkable Ottawa very much is the feel of, you bet you want to have that very happy place that you want to live in. And the choice around that will be a number of things. Convenience, obviously. The environment is a huge, huge piece.
Yeah.
And of course, the neighbors and the people there and the places that you like to go.
Mm-hmm.
You get up and walk, and every day, can you walk in your neighborhood?
That's it.
Or are you hitting the traffic?
Yeah.
It's
been it's coming into this process of starting these podcasts and going through some of the engagement and collaboration part of the exercise. Sitting here now today, I think there's more commonalities than people might think, like the builders aren't really completely at odds with the residents, and the environmentally organized, Ecology Ottawa and some of the other organizations like that. Like, there's a lot more people want the same things in some respects. And there's a few parts and pieces that they'll disagree on. But, that 50, 60, 70%, if we can focus on that and the parts that we agree from different perspectives, because every perspective is valid, because we all have a stake. It's all our city, That part I find encouraging as we go through the process. And it should be a collaborative exercise,
It's a tough, long road, though.
Absolutely.
And, do you have the right players at the table? Because it takes time to do that. As of right, what could I build if I was a builder? And does that neighbor know, whoop, suddenly they get a notice? Well, can you have that conversation with that builder? And we've actually done that quite successfully with some of the builds in Overbrook.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking of Murray Chown, where we've had very good conversations for some of the semis and the type of design. And that gets into design. Is it a box or is it attractive?
That's right.
And is it going to fit? So those kind of questions need to be discussed. And, I would just love to see it part of any build where the builder actually in the proposal has that discussion with the neighbors, or if the organization is there such that they could help facilitate that. And often that's the biggest challenge right there.
Mm-hmm.
It takes time, it takes energy,
Yeah.
And you have to think about it. They're volunteers in their place. They're not paid. In terms of the development industry, working with the development industry is critical. And that was one of the big joys I've had in my conversations with Jason and his team of people there, that I think we are able to look at some of these issues. We may not agree on all of them, but we're having the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
It has to continue.
What would you describe as kind of low-hanging fruit ideas? Things that we can really tackle right away and kind of introduce within some of the policy changes that are coming at the city? Because sometimes I find it, we can get, from my conversation with Rob Barnes from Ecology Ottawa, we're talking about targets in 2040, 2050, but sometimes that kind of longer term horizon might lose some of the stuff that's right in front of you,
Yeah, I was looking at their long-range strategic plan, and trees, ecology. We don't dispute that at all. In fact, we embrace it fully, and that does take time. But if you take a look at a site, and you're going to go wall to wall or within that meter or half of the lot line, there's going to be a dispute in an older area for sure, and we've seen them in Overbrook with the older trees. And and we'll have to have something where you can walk through. So when you ask about the low-hanging fruit, what can immediately be done? I think the conversations we're already having are very, very important. The outreach to the various groups and organizations. When it comes to the Transact information, and I will be very interested to see how that all goes forward. I think within that, that gives you a geographic area. So hopefully the planners have that in mind. And of course, we've got all the issues around the transportation and the LRT. And we already know that there will be permitted heights, et cetera, that will be coming up and embraced because of that proximity. But the real stuff that matters right now is, how do people get from A to B? And can we help support these folks? Can we make sure we got a roof over the head of everybody? How do we get there? How do we, we've got the challenges of the socioeconomic issues. We can't run away from that, even if as a government town, you know. So how's that quality of life, the health, and so on? And those health is huge. Education piece, we've got universities here. We've got lots of opportunities there. The business side, the economics, I am concerned that that small business is embraced and supported in every neighborhood. Those are some of the things that can help. Do we have a BIA in every neighborhood? No, we don't. So it's an uphill battle. Vanier has a BIA, Barhaven, various areas, certainly Westboro, very active. But when you're flying alone in your own community and you're trying to embrace some of this, those needs that are identified, rather than something coming from the outside in always. The other I'll just mention too is, I think around the social housing, and I know this will be a debatable item, but we've got a huge amount of, and I'm using this in Overbrook as an example, way overloaded on the Ottawa community housing. What's the long-range plan there? And that question has to be asked.
Yeah.
Is that happening in every neighborhood? Not at all.
No.
So within there, and people will argue this, I know, but socioeconomically, that changes the complexity and the needs and the support systems. And do we have that?
Yeah.
I'd like to see, I think health is a huge issue. Frankly, I'd like to see some kind of accessible health center in every community. And that could be very much worked out with the ministry. And, we do that with our schools. Could it happen on the health side?
Yeah.
And the economics I've mentioned. And the real quality of life, what really, really matters. So fast forward to the community associations, same thing, asking them, what do you think you need? How can we help you? Or how can we collaborate? And that collaboration, I think, will help a long way if we could ever pull all the players together in one room.
Yeah. How are we doing on time, Will? 10 to 3. So how long's it been? How long? It's just at that kind of precipice where we're hoping kind of things take off.
Yeah.
So
Well, a very good move was, I think, the collaboration. We're just having this chat now, but for folks who may be listening in, it's important for them to know that at our most recent planning committee, which we meet monthly, we had Rosalind speak to the Walkable Ottawa so that the membership have a better sense of what the purpose is of Walkable Ottawa. And I guess the follow-up to that will be the kind of position paper and where you see that happening.
That's right.
And potential for collaboration, how this might work in various areas. So there's a lot of pieces. It's a stepping stone for this. And of course, city staff, it's really important that we have some kind of understanding about what will work or what the general plan is.
Mm-hmm. What where do you find are the biggest needs are within, if we take a step back as a representative of an umbrella group that kind of looks at all the community association, what are the kind of needs in terms of, from a day-to-day functional basis for you guys to kind of operate in order to kind of get that, have the resources available in order to really represent community associations as well as you can?
Well, right off the bat, and this is going back a bit when I first got involved with FCA and started a planning committee, I just said, I want in every community association to have the same planning committee or have something existing
Mm-hmm.
that you can look at all the proposals. Now, that takes a lot of time. That's a big commitment. So, in other words, it's replicating or having a committee at every neighborhood level.
Okay.
So that's the first thing. And are they organized? Do they have a community association? And some areas don't, or they're developing, and that they're going to need some help with that. City councilors could be helping embrace that, and I know some do. Some have very strong meetings monthly with their team or teams of various community associations. But the other thing is, I think we come back to that we're a volunteer base, and the expertise of professionals may or may not always be there. So, for example, Rosalind is an architect. Do you have a planner on your planning committee that can say, well, you got to think about it. The reality is this person can do whatever they want because this is the zoning.
Yeah.
So it's that understanding. And I think if we had some of that expertise around the table, you start looking at these various scenarios of 3D projects and what could be. People may go, wait a minute, this is just too much. But what could be and potential for that. And I guess the other thing I would like to mention too is it's getting the right developer.
That's right.
Who would be interested, or somebody who comes along and says, you know what, this is a place that's just begging for an opportunity of better development, we'll call it, or rehab, or restoration.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's a tear down totally.
Yeah.
And that kind of go-to. So my big dream in all of this for our FCA people is I would like to have a list of go-to people that I could circulate confidently and not be accused of you're biased, Sheila, kind of thing. But quite seriously, an inventory of expertise of who would be willing to work with a community association. Probably pro bono, unfortunately, because we just do not have the dollars. And again, I come back to that base. Some are very well endowed, others maybe not. So lawyers, developers, planners, architects, those I could go on. Yeah.
That's it.
And that'd be a big step forward. And that's something I've talked with some of our members about. And it's to find a way of doing that. And then, without being accused of being biased in one way or the other. The other is I look at some of the examples of, and I'm in conversation with Calgary and Edmonton. I just adore what Edmonton has done. When I was out there, if you think about those metro boxes we used to have, every one of them, when you walk into their neighborhood, has a walking map.
Oh, cool.
Now, we did that in Overbrook a few years ago. We created a map. I mean, it's now outdated a bit, but the streets are still there.
Yeah.
And you would know where the amenities are.
Yeah.
It's not just the Google map, thank you very much. No, it is something that is a walking, or here are the places of interest you might want to walk to and explore. So if we could get that, those are two things very simply, in my view, that would be a big, big start. And that creates, the map itself would create very much that neighborhoodness.
Well, how, because especially in certain neighborhoods, you see those signs that says stop intensification, you know? What would you say to those people?
Well, I think some are hurting. Let's put it that way. And the anger, the angst, the overkill, perhaps, of an area. When I read about in Ottawa South, I think it was on Hopewell Avenue, and I went over there to see the next door property, their balcony or walkout had actually collapsed into the infill.
Okay.
I thought something's very wrong here on this. So, that kind of thing where clearly there was not an established kind of maybe protocol inspection, and that's part of bylaw, and that's
Okay.
not an easy thing. So intensification has to be understood, first of all. It is a mandate by the province, number one, okay? And I'm not a city planner, but what is the right kind of infill? And I think that's what we're talking about in many cases. The other thing is, what is it you want for your area and what's permitted? And I may take an appeal on something, but R3 or R4 allows the developer to do it. So what's the best saw off? And that's why I come back to these conversations are so important with the developer. Maybe you don't like that accordion outside kind of metal. Maybe it's the color. Could we make something a little bit less intrusive or ostentatious, kind of thing? Could we get something? And I've seen that happen where there's been some very, very good kind of adjustments. So, the signs, I think we'll always see obstacles in that way. Some people just say, I just don't want any change.
Yeah.
So change is always going to be an issue. But I think we're in times now that people are really re-examining and reevaluating. And this is educating folks, number one. And I think the other part is, what are the rules around all this? Are they tight enough?
So more engagement, more education, more people need to know from a zoning perspective, right? So,
yeah. Are you going to put a high rise in the middle of an R1?
Well, no, probably not.
I don't think so.
Probably not. No,
but
unlikely.
Maybe there's appropriate locations nearby on those corridors.
Yeah.
And actually, if you look at our example on North River, not North River so much, but on the Vanier Parkway, that's a corridor. And down in Vanier area, you've got a number of high rises along that corridor.
Yeah.
And others, but then on the adjacent streets, respect those places, infill, improvements, try to get that. I think you'll have a happy neighborhood.
That's it. I'm really excited for kind of what the next few months will come out in Ottawa's history. There's a lot of exciting things, and I feel like they've all been culminating to the next 12, 18 months. So thank you very much for joining us. And I look forward, once we have a bit more content from the City of Ottawa to kind of review, then we can continue to collaborate with other kind of key stakeholders. So we can not only hear what the residents has to say, but different industry professionals. So we can all kind of design the one city that we all can be proud of, and we can all look forward to kind of raising our kids into, and kind of retiring to, and building out that potential for Ottawa for generations to come. So awesome. Thank you, Sheila.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Very much enjoyed this. And like you, I'm very interested to take a look and see where this will be going. It's so important for the future of Ottawa.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us on the latest episode of the Walkable Ottawa podcast. If you want to keep up on our progress, make sure to follow us on social media at Walkable Ottawa, as well as visit our website for more information at walkableottawa.ca. If you don't want to miss the next episode, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Thank you.